Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
Sure Bet Coffee. Put the giddy up in your cup. And welcome to the show today. And today's guest is Matt Dinerman, the track announcer at Oaklawn Park. Matt and I, we've been back to a few tracks together, starting out in Del Mar when you were in the press box.
That's right. And I remember when I was working in the press box as the press box steward, basically helping the writers get their deadlines met and giving them information, past performances. You were training horses at that time at multiple tracks, and you were coming up to the press box with your son, Josh, and I would give you past performances, and I would say, hey, you know, I'm practicing being an announcer up here, so maybe I'll call your horses one day. And lo and behold, the first race I ever called on a microphone, Coach Royal, you trained. It was your horse. So
that was pretty cool.
Amazing.
For sure. So, you know, I've run horses at Golden Gate, Emerald Downs, and Oaklawn Park. So you've covered all of the tracks, and as well as, like I said, watching you practice on the roof calling at Del Mar. So when you were initially starting out, and what got you to want to practice to be an announcer?
Well, I just wanted to be at the track. I wanted to be able to handicap, be a good ambassador, and I just love going to the races. I mean, when I was a kid, I was mesmerized by the whole experience, the on-track experience. And when I was a young kid, I would ask my dad a lot about the announcer. At the time, I would go to Del Mar, my home track, and Trevor Denman was calling there. And I felt, wow, this announcer is making the experience a little more exciting, if not a lot more exciting. And as I got older, I said, wow, that would be a cool job to be the person to hopefully help make the experience better for other people. So with that in mind, it's definitely an oddball job, but I went ahead and started practicing in the press box with a recorder and binoculars that my aunt and uncle got me for the holidays one year. And I still use those binoculars today. I haven't called races without them. And that's where the dream began, wanting to be an announcer.
Cool. I know that you were an avid baseball player as well as a fan. Did you play baseball in high school?
I did. Yes, I played
as well as college. And college?
I played at junior college. Yeah, I played. I was a pitcher in college. Pitched in high school and also played center field. And it's pretty funny because when I was working for John Sadler as a hot walker in high school, there was definitely sort of these two loves that were mixed. This old love of baseball that I had for a very long time, since I was a little kid. But then this horse racing thing comes along, and I had to balance both of them because I didn't want to miss work, and I wanted to meet people, and I wanted to learn more about the game. But on the other side of the token, I was also playing baseball. I think that actually my performance on the field was not as good when I was working in the barn area because my legs were tired from hot walking. And as a pitcher, for example, you have to use your legs. That's where the power comes from. So I saw a little bit of regression there in horse racing terms. But I played baseball for, 15 years, had a blast at it, but I left on my own terms and sort of bounced from one love baseball to another, horse racing.
Oh, that's really nice. What about is it true that pitchers aren't good hitters?
I think as you get higher up in the game, you're not quite as good as when you're in Little League, even high school, you can be a great hitter. Yeah. But as you go higher and higher up, it becomes harder and harder. And the coaches, they don't want to see you working on hitting if you're a pitcher. They want you solely working on pitching. And Ohtani is a rare example of somebody who just happens to break that mold.
That's what I see. I said, these guys played Little League and high school. I'm sure they were hitting, but as like you said, when they go up the level and up the ladder, it's almost like they don't even try anymore. So
right.
Good.
They practice bunting sometimes. They let them hold a bat and bunt, but that's about it.
That's cool. Well, so you when you started out at practicing at Del Mar. When did you get your first offer to be a track announcer?
So I was at college at Chapman University, and Emerald Downs had an application process in Auburn, Washington, Emerald Downs. And this was a time where Tom Durkin had just retired, and it was like a game of musical chairs with the announcer. He retires, Larry Colmus goes to New York, wherever Larry was. I think Frank Miramotti got the Monmouth job, and it just sort of, there were guys going to different places. And I remember telling my dad, I don't have experience like what Emerald is looking for, because they're asking for experienced announcers to send in their tape. They had a press release come out asking for that. And I said, but I need to get my tape out there. I know I'm going to be nervous calling races on a microphone for the first time. I'm not going to get this job. They're going to look for somebody who is a lot more experienced, but I want to get my name out there to somebody. So I sent in tapes of my best 3 calls that I had made while working in the press box at Del Mar. And to my astonishment, I was actually driving home a couple weeks later from Santa Anita, because when I went to school, which is about 50 minutes from Santa Anita, I would go to Santa Anita and practice calling races there on weekends just to practice. I mean, as a baseball player, you learn that repetition's key, especially with a specialized skill. And what ended up happening was, as I was driving home, I got a call from Sophia McKee, who at the time was the marketing director at Emerald, and she said, "We listened to your race calls. We think you have talent. We'd love to fly you up tomorrow morning and audition." So went to San Diego, didn't even go back to my apartment at Chapman, drove down farther to where my parents were in San Diego, found a nice suit to wear, and didn't get much sleep because I was thinking about it. And then probably like an hour and a half of sleep, flew up on the plane. And the first time I ever flew on a plane by myself was that afternoon. Got to Emerald, called 2 races, met Robert Geller, and to my astonishment, the next day I was offered the job, and I told them, well, I have to pass my classes because I have my finals this week. But if I pass them, then I graduate and we're on the mend here, and we can start the dream. So that's what exactly happened there.
And I know I was there your whole time at Emerald Downs. And how long was your tenure there at Emerald Downs?
I was there for 2.5 seasons. So I basically came from the bullpen, pun intended, for Robert Geller, who was there the first half of 2015. And I finished up the second half. And I was very lucky to be able to have a week with him when I went up there where he was still there, and he could teach me some tricks of the trade and things that Emerald Downs likes, because every track wants their announcer doing different types of things depending on what they need. And I was there for 2.5 years and had an absolute blast, as I'm sure you remember.
Yeah, I used to come up and visit you in the booth because it was a lot of fun. And then there was even times when I said, okay, our race is running. I don't want to make Matt nervous, but let's hope we do some good. And there were times, like you said, we'd come up and visit, and we'd see the announcer's booth and say, oh boy, if we win, we got a long ways down to get there on the 6th
And you did win a few times.
Yeah.
You came up there with some live horses.
I said, oh, it's become lucky. I better, let's go back up to the booth. Let's change our luck, So that was good. So what was the transition to Golden Gate? How did that come about?
Well, what happened was I had worked at Golden Gate for a year in 2016 as the paddock analyst there. I was not calling races at the time. Michael Rona in 2015-ish, I believe, somewhere in that time frame, 2014, maybe even, he had gotten the job at Santa Anita, and Frank Miramotti had gone to Golden Gate, and he was there for a few years. So I needed the second half of the year to fill in after Emerald. So I had approached somebody from the Stronach Group at the time, Joe Morris, who was in charge of the West Coast operations, and he knew me, and I asked him, hey, I'd love to get some TV experience. Would you be interested in having me up there to maybe do some work as a paddock analyst? And he said, yeah, we've been waiting for the right person, and you seem like you've got good energy, and you're the right type of guy for it. So I was doing the paddock. At the time, after this first full year, go back to Emerald, come back for the second year as the paddock analyst. And right before the Breeders' Cup at Del Mar, their first Breeders' Cup, I remember Frank Miramotti took a job at Aqueduct as the race caller there in the winter for Naira. And David Duggan, who had very recently taken over as the general manager at Golden Gate, called me into his office and he said, "This is what's going on with Frank. We're having applicants, but I think you're our guy. I think you do a really good job calling the races. And are you interested in this position?" And I said, absolutely, because it was a year-round job. It was a step up, home state. I'd always wanted to call races in California at that time. And at that point, we basically just said, okay, let's wait a few weeks and we'll get back to you. And I got the job, made it all happen. And I was there for 6 years and loved Golden Gate.
Boy, Golden Gate, your time there, it seemed like it went by fast. Like you say 6 years and it seems like you were there 2 or 3. You were able to call races on the grass. And that was one of the, if we go over your career to date, that would be one of your main only tracks that you got to call turf racing. And how was that different than calling on the dirt, would you say?
Well, the turf races, they can stack up a little more, for sure. There's definitely a different pace. I mean, you see a lot of races, the finishing and emphasis of finishing in a turf race is a little bit stronger. You always want to have a horse that finishes, obviously, but as opposed to maybe dirt races where you go. And, Dwayne Lucas said there are 3 qualities I love in a racehorse: speed, speed, and speed. So horses that have speed will show that speed, and they want them to continue to carry that speed, as opposed to maybe a turf race where speed isn't quite as emphasized. It's more about the finish, and sort of like a lot of Chad Brown good horses. I mean, the emphasis there is, hey, we're going to go in a nice gallop, we're going to reserve our energy, and we're going to finish. So I think the finishes were tighter on the turf. Luckily, we had synthetic at Golden Gate, which made the races very interesting because synthetic racing plays a lot like turf. And even here at Oaklawn, I've noticed that there aren't nearly as many races where there's 6, 7 across the track battling for the win at the 16th pole, maybe at the 8th pole. But by the 16th pole, it's very clear who are the 1 or 2 or maybe 3 horses, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just a little bit different based on the track. And in terms of turf, you see a lot of tight finishes, and I think that really helped me spot moves, for example. It actually made me a better race caller, spotting moves and understanding in a big blanket finish who looked like they had the best chance to win and who I wanted to focus on.
And that takes us to your next move. So from Golden Gate, you go to Oaklawn. I'm sure you were settled in with 6 years at Golden Gate, but then again, when you see the headlines, Golden Gate to close, I'm sure that factored into your decision, even though you were in a comfortable spot there at Golden Gate. How did that all play out with the Oaklawn Park situation?
Definitely an interesting deal, because I found out Golden Gate was closing probably 20 to 30 minutes before the LA Times leaked the fact that Golden Gate was closing. So, you know how people are. I mean, there was always talk about, I wonder if this is going to happen. So were there people that were shocked? Not everybody. I was actually surprised. I had seen that the Stronach Group was putting investments into Golden Gate. I had seen that they were doing things to try to make the product better. So it was a surprise to me, but not necessarily a shock, because like we talked about, people say things and you just never really know. And when I found that out, it was pretty devastating, but I immediately pivoted to, well, Oaklawn's position is open and I want to apply for that if I can, because obviously Golden Gate's going away. And even though I was very upset about it, I still had to sort of fend for myself like anybody would in that situation. So I actually got in touch with a couple of people at Oaklawn, and the general manager here, Wayne Smith, he said, go ahead and send in your resume. And I had been told by somebody else that they were pretty far into the announcing process. And I said, I'd really just like to send in my resume and my tapes, and if you give me a shot, to at least look it over, that'd be great. And Wayne Smith, I got on the phone with him and he said, absolutely. Yeah, come on ahead and send in your tapes. And probably a couple weeks, probably 5 to 6 days later, maybe, I got a message from him saying, we want you to fly out here and interview. And about a month later, it was right after Santa Rosa, I flew out to Hot Springs, had a really good interview. I thought it went really well and was really impressed with the track. And later, probably another month later, after they had interviewed their other candidates and looked over everybody who had applied, they offered me the job. So I got very lucky, and I feel really blessed. I mean, there's been timing that has worked. Emerald Downs, Golden Gate was great, and I just am really lucky that Oaklawn picked me up, because this is obviously a very high level track, and it's, as the announcer here, it's a big position, and you want to do a good job. So to be here is really an honor, and I've loved it so far. It's been fantastic.
It's definitely a great horse racing town. Everybody loves it. They pack the track. You can go to dinner and people are talking about the races. Reminds you a lot of Lexington. And I was wondering, what are your plans after the Oaklawn meet? Do you have that fill in the rest of the year in mind yet, or can
there are a couple things there's a couple things on the docket that I'm working on, and nothing's official yet, so I can't really go too much into detail, but there is a couple things on the docket here that looks pretty promising, and probably within the next 3 to 4 weeks, if it happens, then people will know. But I'm very lucky, because in the racing business, I've had a lot of support from many different people from many parts of the country, and that does not change to this day. I mean, I've been helped massively in California by many people when I was there. People here have been great in Arkansas. Obviously, as you are in the business longer and you call races longer, more people get to know you. And I think coming here to Oaklawn has actually really helped sort of branch my exposure to other people that maybe don't tune into Golden Gate as much, or didn't tune into California as much. So that's helped. And I'm sort of just taking it one step at a time. But right now I'm focused on Oaklawn at this point and just doing the best I can.
Well, it's you started out good, and you've only got, really kudos to you. And how is it calling some of these graded stakes? Can you feel the added excitement because the money and the graded on these races that you're calling now?
Well, it's pretty funny because you mentioned the money. So somebody asked me after my first week or two here at Oaklawn, what's it like to call a $140,000 allowance race? Because there aren't any of allowance races like that in the country, at least right now. You'll see it at Keeneland. You might see it at Saratoga, something like that, high-level purses. But I said, you know what? It's just an allowance race. Like the purse money, it's really cool to think about when you think about it that way. But whether they're $7,500 claimers, which is our bottom barrel here, or grade 1 horses, if there's 12 of them at the bottom barrel versus 12 in the grade 1, I'm doing the same prep work for every single race, no matter what level. And I'm trying my best to trust my process and do what works for me. When it comes to graded stakes, though, it's interesting because the pressure of calling a race like the Long Acres Mile at Emerald, which is a very prestigious race, or the El Camino Real Derby, the pressure feels the same calling a race like the Rebel or the Azeri last week, which is a prep for the Apple Blossom next month. That feeling of pressure is the same, but the excitement and really getting into the race and with all the people on track, it's definitely a different type of experience. And I think part of that is because of how special Oaklawn is and how the on-track presence is so large and just as good as anywhere, really. So it's been just fantastic to be able to call these high-level horses. And when you're an announcer, you want to call high-level horses down the road. This is what you train to do and practice to do to one day hopefully get your shot at it. And every race is important to me. So again, I do my process the way it works for me, but it's been a real thrill being able to call these races. And you use that pressure in a positive way. And it's like on the baseball field. Maybe if you're watching the game, you're nervous about your team winning or losing. But when you're in the game, once the gates open, for me, I'm focused.
And when you talk about prep work, obviously you probably do some handicapping, so you know where horses are going to be in the race or anticipated to be. Could you tell us and the viewers a little bit about that preparation for handicapping, as well as any program notes or coloring or anything like that?
And that's a great question because every announcer is different. And I think that's one thing about announcing is it's very much a trial and error process throughout your career, especially when you're younger and you're getting into it. But even as you get older, you're still trying new things and, mixing and matching and deciding what works for you. For me, for example, I'm a very visual learner. So a lot of announcers color in their programs and it helps them memorize the silks better. For me, it didn't help me. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not the right way for me, but it could very much be the right way for a lot of people. So there's no right or wrong way to do it necessarily. It's just what works for you. I always handicap a day in advance. So if we have a Friday race card, I'm going to look at it Thursday. If we're running on Friday, in between the races on Friday, I'm looking at Saturday. And I'm handicapping the races and making my own picks for fun, whether I'm on TV giving out picks or not. But I'm also looking in the form for things that I can note in a race call that might be helpful to the public. Adding blinkers, first-time Lasix, first off the claim, off a layoff, all these things that I can note in a race call to give it some spice and some color, and also to be informative and be a presenter of the facts and the information. I think it's more than just saying horses' names and where their positions are. I think it's about telling a story. And in order to tell the story, I think you need to be able to understand the background of the horses that are competing in the story. So with that, I'm looking at all of these things. Even if you've got a horse that needs the lead and they don't go to the lead, it's something you can note. And you're not going to know that necessarily unless you look at the form. So those are all the things I'm noting on. I do look at the form in advance on big weekends here at Oaklawn. So for example, like Rebel Day, I looked at every race card before the first race card of the week. I looked at it on my off days, and I took time out of my off days to look at those because I just want to focus on calling races. There's enough pressure as it is, a lot going on, announcements to be made, and I just want to focus on that all day. But the vast majority of the time, I'm doing my prep work a day in advance. And once I'm done looking at the form, the horses come on the track, and I go one race at a time. I'm not thinking about race two. I start with the first race and start memorizing the silks when they come on into the track.
And so as you see them in the post parade, you kind of mesmerize the silks because they could be different than what's in the program or the form. They could be wearing the wrong set, but now you know what exactly they have on them. And then you know the color of the horses. I'm sure by now, like I do, I can tell the way jockeys are riding. I mean, I can actually, you watch them day in and day out, and you're like, oh, there's Arietta, there's, Torres. So you see these jockeys, and you're like, oh, I could just tell it's Francisco Arietta and his little extra pom-pom that he always has. So right. No, you definitely you give such a good color commentation, and you're never rushed early in the race. You're composed the last quarter of a mile. And now that you're at Oaklawn, has that different wire caused any issues for you finishing at the 16th pole?
I've made it a real point to make sure that I don't screw that up. I was talking to Frank Miramati before I came here. It was I don't remember if it was a month before. I was on the phone with him at Golden Gate, and he said, yeah, it happens to all of us, where once or twice where, oh, geez, the mile finish is the only one that changes where they finish. So that's the good news. Every other distance except the mile finishes at the regular finish line. So all you need to know is, hey, if it's a mile, we're ending at the 16th pole. And there was one race where I almost blew it, but I realized because the second place rider was like 5 ahead of everybody else for second, and he stood up, and that was my cue. For some reason, I was on him. He stood up probably 50 yards before the wire, and he got second, no problem. But, they're finishing. Shoot, I forgot. They're finishing right at the 16th pole. But everything else has been fine. Every other call has been fine. And I tell myself, for myself, but also for the listeners and the viewers, this race ends at the 16th pole, usually on the far turn and turning for home. I say that, and it's just a reminder so everybody knows.
Definitely, because we'll call them the casual players or people that come out to the races. They'll be cheering, and they didn't understand why my horse galloped out past the other one, and it was first at the wire. Why didn't I win? But they get a little confused, or they weren't sure. They didn't understand it. So, but it definitely is nice because it gives the horses a cleaner run to that first turn, not so pressured running into that first turn. So that's good. What else? One of the things that I noticed, and I was going to ask you about this, as far as holding your binoculars, a wireless mic, holding the program, how do you manually do everything? Because I know when I was at Emerald, I'd have a conversation with you. You'd flip the switch, you'd public announce the payoffs, 360, 280, 210, and then you'd flip the switch back like without even thinking about it. And then you go back to the conversation you had with me. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But what are some of the things in your hands and with the binoculars and the microphones?
Well, I've been lucky. Actually, I have always called with a binocular stand. For example, Larry Colmus, I know that he has these binoculars that you hold and you can press a button at the top and it stabilizes it on the inside so nothing's shaking. And that probably actually stabilizes it a little more effectively than a binocular stand. But nonetheless, a binocular stand really helps. I have the binoculars on a stand. Actually, at Golden Gate Fields, I had one made. They had one in Emerald for me already because Robert used one, and they made a duplicate for me. The carpenter at Golden Gate made me a stand for my binoculars. He was a very successful carpenter, Jerry, who could make anything, and he was happy to do it. And then they actually mailed that stand to Arkansas, and I used it. I think there were a couple, the first week, I think I didn't have a stand because it was at Golden Gate, and I actually did have to hold my binoculars, which I got through it no problem. But I always have the binoculars on a stand, which is easy, actually. It helps you with the program because I have a program in my hand. Everybody has a different way of looking at a program if they need to. I know Trevor Denman, for example, he's got a big program that's printed out before the day's races, and it's much bigger than the actual handheld program, and he puts it on a table next to his binocular stand that he has, and he looks down if he needs to, if he forgets a name. We all have our little cheat sheet, so to speak, that we don't want to try to use too often, but if we need it, we have it, and I just have it held in my hand. Travis Stone, for example, is using something that Tom Durkin created, which is essentially this little thing that he attaches to the chest, and the form is basically held out like this, so it's right below him so we can look at it. I can go like that if I need to. That's just how it's worked for me. And the binocular stand helps me so that the binoculars are being held. And if I do need to look at the program, and I don't usually that often, I'm pretty good at the memorizing, but if I need to, I can take a peek and the binoculars are still held there. So those are really the two things that I have when calling a race. I've got my binoculars on the stand where I'm going through the field, and then I've got the program in my right hand, never in my left hand. It's always in my right hand.
And at all three tracks that you've called at, do you have a wireless mic? I mean, wireless mic.
Yeah, I've had a headset.
Headset. That's what I meant.
Yeah, I've had a headset in every single one. And Oaklawn Park actually asked me, and a lot of these guys behind the scenes, these guys and gals, they're very accommodating, and they almost say, well, what do you prefer? And I'm just, my character is like, well, what do you guys have? Or what works best for you? But they called me actually from Oaklawn here in about October, and Nancy Holthus was on the phone with one of our sound guys who runs the sound here. And they said, what do you want? What kind of microphone do you want? And I told them, well, in Emerald and Golden Gate, I have a headset, just like what the NFL commentators wear. I have the same thing with the ears and the microphone right there. So sure enough, they got me one. They probably had one already, but I have used that headset since I started at Emerald.
Nice. And it could be a difficult question, but what is the most exciting race that you've called to date?
Yeah, that's a tough question. There are a lot of exciting. There are a lot of exciting races. I would say on July 3rd, when Barkley beat Mach 1 Rules at Emerald, that was one of my most exciting races to call. This big fan favorite. You couldn't see the ground. There were so many people. It was July 3rd, and at Emerald Downs, as you know, Jeff, there's the July fireworks show. So it seems like the whole state of Washington shows up that night. And it was this big rivalry that had been brewing, and Barkley was a fan favorite, so a lot of people that followed the Pacific Northwest racing, Northern region, knew and were rooting for this horse, and it looked like he was beaten, and he nailed Mach 1 Rules at the finish, which he had done 4 or 5 times in his career. It was a great rivalry, but that was just a really exciting race to call. And I would also say one of the most exciting races that I have called here at Oaklawn Park was probably the Rebel, just because it was, for me personally, my first $1 million race. So that was really exciting. It was like a moment where it's like, holy smokes, I always wanted to call a big $1 million race like this, and here we are. So that was, for me personally, exciting.
and now you're calling Grade 1 races and things that are going to lead on to the Kentucky Derby. I mean, you're going to have some of your calls when on the preview show when they're showing these horses going into the Kentucky Derby, because Oaklawn is a strong prep race track for the Kentucky Derby. So that's going to definitely look good, and your resume just keeps looking better. I'm very happy for all your success. And so I just want to wrap up with this: is there anything that you could think of that if somebody was watching, you would want them to know about Matt Dinerman or track announcing?
Well, I would say if you want to know about me, I am who I am. That's what I would say. You know, what you're getting here on TV and the podcast is who I am, which is very outgoing, very extroverted. I'm a fan just like anybody else. I'm just an average guy and I'm living my dream, and I'm very approachable. So if you see me around the track, feel free to approach me. I love meeting people. And that's one great thing about being an announcer is if you're in the community, if you want to be involved in the community, in the racing community, then you absolutely have a chance to do that. And I enjoy going to the racing office and talking to the agents and the people that work in there and the backstretch and the horsemen and meeting fans. And I've had dinner with owners and breeders and just random fans as well. So that's sort of my personality. And I would say with announcing, the one thing you want to do if you want to be an announcer is practice, 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 no matter what specialized skill you want to do in life. If it involves a specialized skill, repetition is very important. And having a good attitude and being willing to work hard and also meeting people and expanding your network is all very important to being successful.
Well, you've definitely done that. At the 3 tracks that you've worked at, was it part of the job, or did you take it on yourself? Some of the pre-race handicapping or the in-between race on camera handicapping?
Well, I think, for example, at Emerald, the key there when I first got there, I didn't really have much TV experience. So they focused with me early on, hey, just memorize your horses, call the races. That's all we want you to do. And I'd help out Vince Bruin in the publicity office, and we're still buddies to this day. He was texting me today, but I'd help them on off days and do what I could. But when it came to race day, they really wanted me to just focus on calling the races. At Golden Gate, obviously, with the paddock gig that I received, that was the gig until I moved to the announcer's booth. But once I did that, I remember speaking with David Duggan, and David said, would you be comfortable also doing analysis between races? And I said, well, let's give it a race day, but I don't see why not. I'm pretty good with memorizing, and I think I can make it work. And we did. And then at Oaklawn, it's one of these things when I came here where I think it's just, hey, they know that I can do multiple things. I'm not just an announcer. I mean, obviously announcing is the reason I'm here, and it's the number one thing is to call races and be good at calling races and do the best you can. But at the same time, it's like, hey, if we have a talent that can do multiple things and he can do a good job at it, we're going to use them. So, for example, I'm on the pre-race show every other race day, but the other every other days, it's Nancy Holthus and Crystal Conning who both do a really great job. And that's another cool thing is like at Golden Gate, I was sort of the one-man band. And here we've got a trio of people who do different things, Nancy, Crystal, and myself, and we work together, and it's been really fun to collaborate with them and be a part of that team. And I enjoy being a part of a team atmosphere.
Yeah, no, that I know Nancy from back at the Hollywood Park days, as well as my visit out there to Oaklawn. I've known Crystal as a jockey at Turf Paradise, and she stepped into that Monmouth Park position and did a great job and just keeps getting better as well. So yeah, you're definitely surrounded by a good team there. And Matt, I really appreciate you coming on the show. We're getting it going. I want to let people see kind of behind the scenes of all different aspects of the different jobs on the track and as well as get to know the personality. So I really appreciate your time today.
It's great to be on, Jeff. Thanks for having me. And you're a good guy to do it because Jeff, he's been in the game for a long time and been in a lot of different roles. So it's been great to be on with you. And thanks for having me, Jeff.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Nobody does it better.